Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CEDH. I'm one of your hosts, Lyndon, aka Noobzors, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts Matt, aka Null.
Hey.
Reed, aka Sick Robot.
Howdy, howdy.
And Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going?
And in this episode, we will be covering playing through / around centralizing cards. And through the title, I'm sure, you can figure out what some of those cards are. Mystic Remora, maybe one of the most centralizing cards in the format. So we'll be getting into some of that in the main topic. But before we do any of that, what have you guys been up to since the last episode? And before you say anything, I'll start.
Subtle.
I want to just brag about playing. I was jamming. There was a historic challenge on Magic Arena. I think a week ago, as of the recording of this. And I absolutely cleaned house. I was just farming the challenge over and over again. I 7-1'd it twice. I think I had an overall win rate of 76%. Using a deck that was not an established meta deck. Which, low key, I think that it's one of the best decks in the format that no one knows about. It's Dragonstorm combo. So to any historic aficionados in our listener base, if you wanna know about that list, hit me up.
You have to sign up to the OnlyFans for that one.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
you have to be a max tier patron to get deck lists, of course.
Oh God.
And coaching
Please.
sessions, of course. It's a whole ordeal.
I will quit the podcast if we ever sell deck lists.
Live.
That's my promise to all of our listeners.
So now I know how to force Morgan out. Excellent.
Yep.
But have you guys done anything, or should we move on? I know. I just want to brag a bit, but if you guys have anything you want to brag about or tell people about, then
just regular day-to-day things.
cool. Well, jumping into housekeeping, we have a new patron. So big shoutouts to Joseph T. You rock.
I feel like you said that like there was gonna be a follow-up, but there wasn't.
You psyched me out because I'm next, and I looked at the
Shit
list.
for you. He's making
one.
all of our listeners feel guilty for not being patrons already.
To
You, the
Joseph
listener.
T, and it could have been your name here, but
Yeah. Cool. So moving on to new developments. I think based off the last episode, it's not so much a new development, but we're going to Tier 1 Con. Woo!
but like for real this time, like we're actually
Yeah.
pretty confident now.
Yeah. So previously we were a bit unsure because we weren't sure when we were going to be getting our second dose because the Ontario government, hooray. So initially we weren't sure if we were going to getting the second dose until like after Tier 1 Con, and then I think Morgan and Matt and Reed, you guys both have your second pokes, and then mine scheduled in for a couple days, and Morgan hopefully soon after. So
Turns out Canada is doing not too bad in the standings.
Canada and Ontario sort of kicked their asses into gear and got everybody vaccinated, so.
hell yeah. We're really looking forward to going, and hopefully meeting some of you guys there. I know the last time I went to a convention where I got to see some listeners and interact with other people was GP Vegas, and that was a ton of fun. And I think Tier 1 Con is going to be even better, so I am absolutely stoked.
Imagine just being Lyndon and completely forgetting about everyone who came to GP Montreal.
Oh,
Yeah,
we did go to
okay.
GP Montreal, but we were hanging out with people who
That
we
psyched
knew,
me out.
right?
I was like, was Vegas really
Couldn't
after
be me,
Montreal?
dude.
No, but we were hanging out with other people. We didn't meet any like new dedicated listeners or like people who
We met a couple people, but
yeah, sure. Shout out to all the people who we met in GP Montreal. Oh man, sorry.
What a dick. What a guy.
Yeah, Tier 1 Con, hype. Let us know for sure. You know what? Just go to the Discord. Let us know if you're going to be going to Tier 1 Con, so then maybe we can organize like a just maybe a meet and greets or something like that, that'd be
Meetup.
super dope.
We
Yeah,
might
definitely. If you're there,
Yeah.
definitely come up and say hi. It's like
yeah.
we don't. Most of us don't bite.
Yeah,
and,
if you're wondering what we
you know,
look like,
we'll
we're
hold
the,
it
we're the,
back.
we're the
Don't worry
nerdy
about
looking
it.
ones,
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
of course.
I'm lost
we have
in the crowd of 300 nerdy looking people.
Dang.
If we have shirts, we might even wear them. You know.
And also, yeah, definitely refer to us by our Discord usernames. I love that.
Of course, yeah.
No, it's not. No,
Yeah.
like I say that when I say that, I'm not meaning that sarcastically, because it's honestly fun when people say, "Oh my God, you're Noobzors" or whatever. It's like that's so cool. It's such a unique experience. Reed, new developments. Yours is up next.
Yep. So talked about this 2 podcasts ago at this point, because I wasn't on the last one. So new database update is up and out and good to go, up and running. Go check it out. I just wanted to say that you should all submit your list for the next review cycle, because it's the community that helps keep the resource the way it is and helps keep making it better. So submit your lists, get it on the Brewers Corner, get the feedback, all that good stuff.
Cool. Next up, Morgan, you want to get this one?
Yeah. So I was a guest on the Playing with Power podcast, and that episode should be coming out sometime. I believe they said near the end of July. It may wind up being after our next episode, rather than after this one, but I wasn't sure. It might come out between the 2 episodes, so I figured I'd just give you all the heads up and keep an eye out for that, because had a good conversation with Ryan from Playing with Power.
Hot, dude. Hope you shelled our podcasts tons.
I tried.
Good. I was gonna say, because in under new developments we have the Playing with Power podcast, which they're on like episode 3 or something right now, I think, right?
Yeah, I think I'm like episode 4.
I was gonna say, like, as a new development of their podcast, I was gonna say I don't think there's many people who listen to our podcast who wouldn't know who Playing with Power are, as opposed to the opposite direction. But yeah, no, that's awesome. I look forward to listening. That's it for new developments, and we can get into the main topic, which again is playing through / around centralizing cards. So I think throughout this topic, we're going to mainly be talking. We're going to be talking a lot about fish, and also we're discussing pre-show about how we're going to do maybe a second episode to discuss a different category of cards. So we kind of made 2 distinctions. One, which is cards that give you freedom of choice. They say, like, when something happens, do something. When an opponent casts a card, a non-creature spell, draw a card unless they pay 4. Right? The opponent can choose to play as many non-creature spells as they want, 0 or 10. But something like a Rule of Law, which again is a very centralizing card, can't really do that. It's very much you can the only thing available to you is how to time your spells, and how to approach your game plan, so that sort of thing. So we're going to be doing those kinds of cards in another episode, but in this episode we're going to be focusing on the likes of Mystic Remora, Rhystic Study, Wandering Archaic, that sort of thing.
Crom, yeah.
I think, well, just to clarify a tiny bit, I think specifically ones that probably produce hidden information are treated a bit differently than ones like Smothering Tithe, which don't, and I guess Wandering Archaic in that sense too.
So our first kind of subtopic we have is around versus through, because in the topic I said playing through / around, so they aren't just synonymous with each other. There's a difference, and we were discussing it a fair bit pre-show. So I mean, let's just get into what is the difference between playing around something versus playing through something.
So I think like the easiest place to start, because there's certainly some overlap or some controversy. The easiest place to start is that when you don't know for certain that it's happening, but you're playing to mitigate the effect if it does, that's playing around. So casting your spells, like you have a Lotus Petal in your hand, you're just going to drop it turn 1. So if someone after you plays a fish, you don't have to give them a card. that also plays around something like a wheel. Stuff like that would be playing around. I think it gets a little bit more nuanced, like you could say that like casting your instant speed tutor in response to a fish, I would probably consider that playing around. But playing through versus around, like you could, there's a little bit of nuance of like, sometimes you pay for one person's Rhystic study and not the other. Like, are you playing through one Rhystic study and around the other? There is some nuance to like what various people would consider to be playing through once the cards are in play. But certainly before they're in play, I would say is playing around them.
Cool. Yeah, I think a classic example, and the one we were discussing pre-show on how to really define around versus through, was the counterspell example. And if you're making a play and your opponent has so many, and this is I guess more of a 60 card thing, but I guess it's still applicable to CDH, where you're like, I'm gonna play around my opponent having a force of will. If you just change your sequencing, you're able to maybe play around that to some extent. That's playing around, and then playing through is maybe if they have a revealed force of will, or maybe that is still playing around. That's where some of the nuance comes in. But yeah, typically playing around is it can be a lot of the hidden information, like Morgan was saying. But yeah, so now that we have that sort of those definitions kind of in mind, we can move on to the actual, how to play through and around these cards. And so the first category we kind of, or the first maybe perspective that we wanted to touch on, was how to play around these cards from a table perspective versus a selfish perspective. So do any of you guys want to start on this one?
Well, you should just be selfish because it's a prisoner's dilemma, right?
Yeah, it's the one.
Yeah. But he's being selfish.
So,
I mean, why can't I be selfish?
Okay. First sort of key thing to explain about this that I think I've certainly seen it described as a prisoner's dilemma. The key thing about prisoner's dilemmas is that the choices are made simultaneously, or at least in such a way that you don't actually know what the other person chose, and you can't base your choice based on that. So, sometimes it is correct to be selfish, but when you're being selfish, you have to keep in mind that it's not just evaluating, is this play worth my opponent drawing one card? Because it's very likely that you're going to prompt your other opponent, like the other opponents, they'll see you do something, give it a card, and essentially use that as justification. It's like, well, I don't want to fall behind, so I'm also going to make a developing play that's going to give a card. And so, like, really a more accurate sort of heuristic would be, is this play worth my opponent drawing 3 cards, which is obviously very, very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's sometimes it is correct to be selfish, and that's one thing that, the whole don't feed the fish, blah, 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 like that's, it's a very good heuristic, but there are times when you can't afford to fall behind yourself, because ultimately you're trying to win the game. You're not playing to not lose.
I mean, it's like the default should almost always be to pay for, like, fish specifically. We'll probably get into this a bit later, but like fish is sort of a different case compared to a lot of the other effects like this. But the default is usually to pay for these kind of things, or just like not let your opponents gain an advantage. But there's certainly like a lot of exceptions to the rule where it's like it's in your favor to like just let them have the advantage.
If you're a turbo deck and your primary way of winning is by surprising people in the early game, and it doesn't make sense all the time to just yield to the mid game to wait for the fish to die. But sometimes it does.
And also, like, there's other niche scenarios as well. Like, we've talked about this kind of stuff before, like, where if you're the only other rock deck at the table, like, if somebody plays a fish, and then the 2 other opponents are on dork decks, and they're probably not going to be feeding it, and you're the only person on a rock deck, like, in order to keep up, you just have to feed the fish, because there's no way that you can afford to let everybody else play all their acceleration out, and then you just have to sit there and not play anything.
I guess the kind of, like, one sentence key here is like set the pace. Kind of realize like how much advantage you can actually give away, and don't try to break that, I guess.
Yeah, the comment about like, you know, the rock versus dork decks. I just remember playing. I forget who I was playing against, but it was like exactly the situation. I was one of the dork decks. The other person was on a dork deck, and then this person I think was going first, and basically like kind of extracted an informal agreement from the people. He was like, I don't want us all to feed this fish, so like, are you guys cool to not feed the fish? Like, we can all hold back a little bit and just let it die, like it was an early fish. And me and the other dork deck went like, sure. And then what wound up happening was like, it was out for 2 turns. I played like land dork into land Timna or whatever it was. The person after me did something similar. The fish finally goes away, and then the rock deck like throws out, like, he went like 2 mana rock into Mox Opal into Ponder into something, and like I went like, all right, cool, Thrasios into Ponder, and the other person went like Thrasios into Imperial Seal or whatever. And he was like, wait, you guys, basically he like after the fact was like, you guys couldn't even have fed the fish even if like we hadn't agreed not to. We were like, but you agreed not to. Like, and so you don't want to put yourself in that sort of situation where everyone's making a quote unquote sacrifice, but you're actually sacrificing something a lot more valuable than your opponents.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a case that comes up, even like independent of the actual card types that everybody at the table is playing. It can also come up in turn order where, and this especially becomes the case if like one person got a turn before the fish, and then the fish comes down and 2 people are like outside of the fish. Is that you'll see a lot of the time the decision tends to be made that the people behind the fish will spend like their first turn like feeding the fish 1 or 2 cards a piece just to get up to speed so that they don't immediately fall behind and like hand the game to the player in first, or the player that like played before the fish.
Yeah, that's an effect that I feel like is like even more amplified with some of the effects that aren't a choice, but yeah, just the huge advantage you can get from like 1 extra turn without the effect. I think it's also a little bit more amplified with turn 1 Rhystic studies, because it's
certainly.
actually quite realistic to start paying on your second turn if you like got to develop
and
on your first turn.
And also like there's no like a turn 1 Rhystic study isn't going away without external intervention.
Yeah.
So like you might as well
Such a key
feed
difference.
it early and like keep up to speed rather than just like try to pay for it, lose in tempo, and then eventually end up having to feed it anyway eventually.
One thing I like to do, and this is more from the table perspective, is that I like to be vocal as soon as I see a fish come down early, where I like to just get a pulse on what other people are thinking. It's like, so we're all agreeing that we can kind of starve this thing out or whatever. Like you get a pulse on what people are thinking. If someone says, I can't afford to do that, I've got to play some amount of cards, then that you're not going to be. You don't want to feed the fish player too many cards, but at the same time you don't want to be the first person, as like Morgan said, to not play into it and then have your next 2 players play into it because now you're the furthest behind. It is very tough. The one thing that maybe is like also a bit kind of scummy is that if you're the last person, like let's say player A has a fish and you're player D, if player B and C both kind of took turns off to play around the fish, and then you can be like, well, I have a great opportunity to kind of just get ahead now. Like that's something that might be tempting, but if the fish is going to be around for a while, then all you're just signaling to the next to player B and C that I'm not going to be a team player, and then they should just be feeding the fish as well. So yeah, you got to be very cognizant of how your actions signal the other players and how that will play out.
Yeah, like playing into a lot of these effects is like you have to weigh the short-term gains. Jesus, that is a hard one to get through, I guess. The short-term gains of just like playing through them and not like not respecting them, versus like you might say, okay, well, I'm getting a benefit for this, and the person, like the other person's getting a benefit for this, but I think it raises my probability of winning more. But if you're just operating on that logic, then you're not looking a bit more to the future, which is that you're not actually getting as much of a benefit as you think compared to the person with the value effect or the recurring effect in play, where other people will then choose to not like respect it, and then they get way more benefit out of it than you did.
Just to kind of make that clear, like there pretty much aren't really any plays that are going to be better than like if you're playing through to like a later stage in the game, there pretty much isn't anything that's better than drawing a card for every single spell your opponent casts that you could do, unless you're setting up a win, in which case you're not trying to get to the next stage of the game.
Yeah, there's a couple plays where I think it's, yeah, especially in the early turns if the fish comes in. And we can get into this because our next category we're going to talk about is how the play changes depending on when the fish comes in. So actually let's just move on to that, and then I can sort of chime in. So yes, when the fish comes down changes completely how you're playing around it. Rhystic study, as it was pointed out, maybe less so. You can start paying for it right away, and it's going to be there for a long time, so there's no really starving it out. But a fish is a bit different. So I am generally not a fan of turn one fish as a player who could be playing the fish. What do you guys think about that? And we can discuss why from
That
the other perspectives. Yeah.
There are a lot of contextual decisions that need to be made there than just saying like blanket don't play turn one fish. I don't know.
Well, sure. Let's say you're player A on the play land fish. Do you play that?
I'm not trying to immediately set up a turn 2 or 3 win, and I'm looking for another.
You're looking to have it just be a draw spell, like people might often be, like a value piece. I just draw a couple cards. Maybe it's an ancestral recall.
It hugely depends on what else is in my hand. If I'm going first, I think it's a much better play on average than not going first, because you can actually catch like when when you give everyone that free turn, there's going to be that person who plays like land, Lotus Petal, Rite of Flame, 2-mana rock, and like if you don't play your fish turn 1, then you just gave up a recall on that sequence. Especially like I think there are arguments depending on the matchup. If you think, for example, especially when you have the dorks, you can act like it's actually often quite playable to sort of go land fish, land dork on turn 2.
Yeah.
And then you can even keep it on turn 3 and still have a mana up for like, you actually have 2 mana up, like one from your land and one from the land that you play. But obviously if you go land dork, land fish, then you have an extra mana on each of your turns, and you can keep the fish around for like sometimes a very, very long time. Yeah. So it would depend on like, am I trying to catch people's like mid-range development, or am I trying to catch their early explosive turns? And that hugely depends on what kind of deck you're playing against. Like obviously if you play your fish on turn 1 and everyone else goes cool land dork, like yeah, you look like an idiot.
But if you're playing against like 3 Rog Silas players, then you're just like, yes,
exactly.
please.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, let's just say you are faced with that decision. What do you think is like the minimum threshold? Like, does it just take one deck that is super explosive?
Well, I think
it also depends, I think, honestly, if there's one of those decks at the table, but like they mulligan, like they're an aggressive mulliganer, then like I'd be more inclined to play the turn 1 fish, because it's more reasonable to think that like they would have the turn 1 accelerant because they mulligan toward it, right?
Yeah, I don't know that I would play it into like 1 turbo deck and 2 like bare minimum rock like oof supporting type decks.
No, certainly
but
not.
Like I'd probably play it into if the pod was like 1 heavy dork light rock deck, 1 mixed deck, and 1 heavy rock deck, I'd probably play it turn 1 on the play.
Yeah, I think I kind of had the same initial like judgment.
So interesting that you guys. For me, I think. I think for me it's it can be dependent on matchup, but for me, a lot of the time, it is often about looking at my own hand and my development. If I am playing the turn one, so unless I have some kind of follow up and I'm able to go like turn one fish land dork like Morgan said, you can often be locking yourself into paying for a fish to kind of reap the value from it at a cost to your development. And unless you have some really good catch up mechanisms, you can actually fall behind the table if people choose to play around it, which is kind of why we wanted to talk about when, and because from the opponent's perspective, if your opponent, let's say, is not on a dork deck, right, and they don't open with like a soul ring or a mana crypt to help just support their fish while also making plays that advance their own game plan, starving out the fish is actually a reasonable idea. In the case where it's a green deck or like a dork deck where maybe they go turn one fish and they have the turn two land dork, or in the other case where it's like turn one land dork, turn two fish. Those kind of scenarios are ones where starving out the fish becomes less of a reasonable idea. And I think that's something that people definitely need to consider, both from playing the fish and from playing against the fish. Starving out the fish is not always a reasonable option.
Yeah, I did want to comment on. Sorry, I just wanted to comment on like the apprehension to play out the fish turn one sometimes because you'll be stuck playing for it. I think actually a lot of the times that like people get stuck paying for a fish that they don't really have the mana to do, and they're just like making land drop, pay for fish, do nothing. I feel like a lot of that is actually sort of like a sunk cost thing that I feel like a lot of people aren't super great at evaluating when to just like let a fish go, even if it didn't do enough, and just like accept that it was sort of like a semi-time walk, and then just get on with your life after it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you mulligan to the point where you kind of need the fish
like you need
to
the
draw
fish
cards, and that's fine. But yeah, I certainly know what you mean. Where some people will like it's like, well, it hasn't drawn me the 6 cards that's supposed to draw me yet, so I'm just gonna keep paying for it. Where it's like, okay, but you got your time walks off, like just you got your value from the fish, even if it wasn't like exactly the type of value you maybe were hoping for. So take it and be happy and move on and get it to actually developing your play in the game.
Yeah.
And of course,
another kind of point to add too. Oh, sorry. I just want to kind of make a distinction, which is there are kind of two types of dork decks. There's the types of dork decks that can follow their dorks up with bigger dorks, and paying for the fish for a prolonged period of time in that type of deck is fine because you still are increasing your available mana turn after turn. But if you are kind of like, I don't know, like playing the one mana set of dorks and you don't really have any of the bigger ones, then it becomes you set your mana each turn.
Mm-hmm. And of course, this is all dependent on where you are in seeding, because if you're player D, then going your turn one fish is everyone else's turn two, and then that's just it can be a lot easier for your opponents to still be making plays that progress their board state without or to stall out the fish if you don't have something to do. I generally like holding a fish for, unless I have like a crypt or soul ring or something, for turn two if I'm in a non-dork deck, or even dork decks as well, because I can go like turn two, let's say a arcane signet into fish. It just puts you in a lot better position to still advance your board state.
Obviously, if you have something like an arcane signet, then holding the fish makes a lot more sense, because you can if you play the fish turn one, then you lock yourself out of the arcane signet until the fish is gone, or you draw some other sort of accelerant. Whereas if you play the arcane signet into it, then you have like 3 mana a turn plus paying for the fish, as long as you keep up your land drops. I think that's like an obvious case where you don't play it turn one, or like you're much less likely to play it turn one, versus if you have no acceleration in your hand, or you have I think 1 mana acceleration makes me more likely to play it turn one. 2 mana acceleration makes me less likely to play it turn one. Is like the sort of basic idea.
So I think the moral of the story with fish is there's not many cards that are just so good that you're always gonna want to play it as soon as possible. It does depend on boards, matchup, your hand, what your turn seating, and all of that. Although there might be some exceptions with, for example, Rhystic Study, where it might just be right to play it as soon as possible. And that's something that we can discuss now. Is slamming Rhystic Study as soon as possible, assuming that you don't have to try and defend it with some additional mana. That's one of the main reasons I would think to want to wait on my Rhystic Study, is that it's so powerful that I want to have mana up to potentially defend it. But other than that,
but who's gonna
want that in as the sooner that card is in play, the sooner you can start impacting the game with that card's ability.
I feel like if we're talking about casting a turn 1 or turn 2, like the list of things that counter a Rhystic Study on turn 1 or turn 2 is so small that I'm just gonna almost jam it every time. I don't know.
Yeah,
and Rhystic Study is also one that it's just better earlier, because with Fish, obviously it gets harder and harder to keep around, so there is an element of it being better later. But with Rhystic Study, its strength is only affected by how easily your opponents can pay for it, and obviously that just gets easier and easier as the game goes on. So it with Fish, you might actually draw more cards later on when stuff is happening. Whereas with Rhystic Study, generally the best turns to have it are those earlier ones where people can't afford to pay for it.
So before we move on to the next section, which I guess we've already touched on a bit, but we can come back and kind of cover some more. I wanted to mention Wandering Archaic and talk about the Wandering Archaic from the table perspective and the kind of when idea. So from the table
this is an easy one. Pay for Wandering Archaic.
Yeah, there is
except when the copy thing doesn't actually do anything. But yeah.
Yeah,
Pay
or on a turn where you're trying
sure.
to combo and it does. It's like you resolve the silence, or you're able to fight through something, and it's like, well, I'm not going to pay for this demonic tutor that I'm going to cast, or something along those lines. And from the table perspective, Wandering Archaic is kind of interesting because it unlike Fish, where giving your opponents extra cards. I guess there are times, actually, not thinking about it, when Rhystic Study and Fish, if it's in a game deciding counter war, sometimes the out is to draw your opponent's cards with Fish or Rhystic Study. That happens. But most of the time, it's always to your detriment that an opponent is drawing cards. Wandering Archaic, on the other hand, it completely depends on what side of the are you trying to respond to someone trying to win, or are you trying to win yourself? Because if you're trying to respond to someone winning, casting a counter spell and then not paying the 2 and then having another your Wandering Archaic opponent get an additional counter spell to help defend is actually a boon. So yeah.
Can I just say I love how political Wandering Archaic is sometimes? That's such a great
yeah.
Can I just say I hate how hard it is to try to win through Wandering Archaic all the time.
Yeah. I think that it's truly what makes Wandering Archaic so strong, is it makes it very hard for your opponents to win through it or to do things proactively for their own. It makes it very difficult for your opponents to do things proactively for their own game plan, and then it makes it great for you trying to resolve your own game plan as the Archaic player. So it's very strong in that sense. Just be prepared that if you tap out for a Wandering Archaic, which I think we've talked about before on the podcast, how Wandering Archaic is one of those cards, because of the effect it has, you can feel more comfortable tapping out into it, that if your opponent Gilded Drakes it, that you're in for a world of hurt.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
But also make deals to get double removal spells with your Wandering Archaics.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I have loved those experiences of okay, I'm casting this red elemental blast, but it's on the condition, and I won't pay it for it, but it's on the condition that you kill that Crom.
So regarding Wandering Archaics, the when discussion, I want to get your guys' takes on if it's right to how correct is it to tap out for an Archaic versus hold up interaction to potentially protect your Archaic.
I'm always afraid of Gilded Drake, so never.
Honestly, I just don't play good creatures because then people take them with Gilded Drake.
Ban Gilded Drake when, man, come on.
Actually.
Dude, that's why I play Cody. You just play no good Gilded Drake full things.
Gilded Drake has an actual likelihood of getting banned, I feel like. But
I certainly hope so. That card is obnoxious. Yeah. Okay.
I feel like it's unfortunately too expensive and uncommon like it's past the threshold where if it was way cheaper, I feel like it would have a little bit of the like cyclonic rift effect of people being like, this is obnoxious, it happens all the time, and it's a huge pain in the ass. But it's like a $300 or something dollar car. I don't know how much it is now, but it keeps going up. I can't keep up.
It's
Well, I mean,
it's twice as much as the last time you.
It's
mentioned this
hundreds
price.
of dollars
Yeah.
card, and so like
Yeah.
casual players just don't run into it that often. $392.87. Okay, $300.
So Matt,
More like
here's
400.
the solution to that. You and Lyndon start the Mid Power podcast, and then just shill Gilded Drake relentlessly
Oh God, no!
to get a band.
That feels like
Yeah.
that feels like
Power
going against my-
podcast shilling $400 cards.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I'll freely, whoever's listening to
Dab.
this, if you have any connection to Sheldon's playgroup, I will freely send you a Gilded Drake if you could somehow get it into any of those decks. It's worth it.
Just get. If you can Gilded Drake, Sheldon, and the RC stuff constantly, we'll support that. Yeah. No.
To be clear, we do not condone ruining people's fun to
Yeah,
try and
yeah,
get things
sorry.
banned.
Very
Yeah.
much sarcastic. Not.
That being
So
said,
our-
I have
I
a
just-
$100 bounty for every time you cast a Gilded Drake.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna get maliciously quoted out of context, but
Yeah,
at
yeah.
least we have the response prepared now.
So our next category we had was matchup dependency, and we did cover this to some extent. Does anyone else? Do we have anything else we want to say about it? Which is depending on the pod, you're going to prioritize playing it turn 1 versus turn 2,
Which is the
even less depending on your hand. But if you're 3 Rog Silas decks, get that into play as fast as possible.
basically just it boils simply down to everything is dependent on matchups.
Yeah.
And you can't fully analyze any of these things without the matchups. So
One thing I will
Yeah.
say about matchups that we didn't cover, we were mostly talking about early fish with this sort of thing, is the late game fish.
the worst fish to play against ever.
Yeah, sandbagging. If you're playing against mono Thrasios, Timna, Grindfest mirrors, then it's possible that you might want to sandbag the fish for your if you open it in your opener, you might want to just take a couple turns to develop your mana, get established, and then drop that on like turn 3 or turn 4. That way, it's a permanent feature of your board for the rest of the game, and it just becomes impossible to play through. Rhystic Study, you don't really have that in these kinds of games because the tax gets easier and easier to pay for as the game goes on. 4, while it does get easier to pay for, is still a massive hurdle.
It doesn't get realistic to
exactly.
pay for.
Yeah.
I mean, I think also another thing, sort of going back to looking about playing against fish as opposed to like when to play it in your deck. It is also important to consider the deck that is playing the fish, because I think that's something that's often overlooked. For example, like if you're trying to do really proactive stuff, you should be more likely to respect the fish out of a deck that's like very controlling. Like, I mean, if someone's playing like Curious Control or that type of deck, just feeding them a bunch of cards trying to like set up to turbo off the next turn is very rarely going to work out well for you. Whereas it might work better if it's another proactive turbo deck, right? Like they draw a bunch of cards. If they're still paying for the fish, then they're a little bit lighter on interaction. Maybe you can force something through. Whereas if you're playing a more mid-rangey deck, maybe you can't afford to feed the turbo deck cards because they might just untap and win, but you actually can afford to feed the more controlling deck cards to establish your value engines because you're expecting the game to go long, and then them having some raw number of cards initially is actually less valuable than you developing your Sylvan library or whatever it was.
Yeah, to put that generally, like the deck that has the Remora in play, assuming that's not you, if you have an unfavorable matchup against that archetype, so like mid-range versus control or whatever, then maybe you should respect it.
Cool.
Actually, though, a really good heuristic is to just always be the player with the fish.
Oh, true. But speaking of
helps.
heuristics, our next section is on best practice with playing against fish and I guess playing with fish, and heuristic studies and whatnot. So, what are some good heuristics that we can follow? To play around fish, play with fish. So, one thing that I kind of use as a rule of thumb is I generally find, I know Morgan just talked about Sylvan libraries and things. I think it's if it's an early fish, it's generally worth it to give up a card to develop a Sylvan library, and it's basically always worth it to give up a card to develop your own fish or your own heuristic study or your own insane value engine of that degree. That's my
yeah. In regards to fish, specifically, yeah, pretty much every single CDH playable enchantment is fine to develop.
I think you can maybe take a turn off to not play your carpet of flowers, if you're trying to starve out a fish, because it does have that ritually aspect. But I mean, again, maybe if it's just allowing, if you're against a mono blue player, and then you're going to be able to use that mana to actually just pay for a fish on something else, then.
Yeah, I suppose if there literally aren't any islands.
I would say that feeding a fish like 6 cards to put a Blood Moon into play, generally not best practice.
God. Yeah.
Go on, Morgan.
Stacks.
Actually, any names.
I actually did have a question that I wanted to ask here, sort of related. How many with a fish in play, like assume it's like turn 1, turn 2, whatever. How many cards would you feed the fish player to put a Smothering Tithe into play?
I don't think more than 3.
Yeah.
But I definitely
would you feed
consider feeding them 3. Depending on the texture of the pod, there are definitely pods where I would feed them 3 cards to put a Smothering Tithe.
If they're player A and you're player B, I could see feeding it and kind of setting that like pace.
It also depends for me on when looking at my next turn, how many cards would I have to feed them to still get that Smothering Tithe into play. Like if it goes down from 4 to 1, right, then waiting is worth it. If it goes down from 3 to 2, waiting does not seem worth it.
Another sort of heuristic thing is I would say, unless you need to hit land drops, please don't cast your ponders into fish. Or like those cantrips. That's one that frustrates me so much. Like, you're essentially playing a card that says like scry 2 if you cast a preordain, because you're drawing an opponent a card as well as you. Like,
oh god, no, Mark, you can't make that argument, because then we got the Archangel out bandwagoners on our ass.
Oh god.
I think the more detrimental side effect of that, besides nullifying your draw, is more just putting the other 2 players in a position where they feel like you're just disregarding and they feed.
Yeah, I feel like there probably shouldn't be, but realistically there is a very large emotional aspect to the fish where every card you feed it makes your opponents feel completely justified in feeding it a card. And I don't know. It's obviously hard to like evaluate this behavior because you don't know what they would have done if you hadn't, but I see like someone giving the fish like a quote unquote bad feed, and very often then I see more bad feeds in like of that same fish.
There's always the benefit of the doubt with like hidden information, unfortunately.
Yeah, like if one person goes like turn 1, land, let's say like land Imperial Seal, because I think Imperial Seal is one that is
reasonable.
Often
I'd feed a fish an Imperial Seal.
Yeah, it's often very easy to justify, right? It's like, this card is slow, so casting it a turn later is like, that means I'm not seeing the card until turn 3, it might be too late, whatever. It's one card, it's not like anything crazy. That, I think, is very unlikely. Your opponents are like unlikely to go, well, he plays Imperial Seal, so, that means I'm going to play my Git Probe. Whereas if you play like a preordained, then they are going to be like, well, I guess we're all just being greedy here. Even if like, obviously 2 wrongs don't make a right, but there is that. I think there is an element of an emotional aspect to the fish where people will use bad, like you feeding the fish badly to justify themselves feeding the fish badly, and
yeah.
So you want to try and avoid giving them any reason to do that.
I mean, like,
Along the
highly
lines.
strategical. So I was just
Yeah, go ahead.
a highly strategical game, generally speaking, requires level-headedness, and like usually you want to catch yourself making an emotional decision.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, obviously, we can't all be, perfectly rational robots all the time. Um,
Yeah. So along the lines of the smothering tithe discussion about a fish, I want to say I think getting effects that punish draw or make it more difficult for your opponents the fish player to utilize the resources. So rule of laws, or like root maze or something, or null rods or something to that effect. I think that's also a very reasonable play. Also, the benefit of that is it also it definitely limits the amount of fish drawing that your opponents can do if they if you're like, oh man, this guy's kind of bad, he's gonna feed the fish 5 cards, maybe I'll just play this rule of law and then he's only gonna feed it 1 max. So
deafening silence definitely limits your opponent's ability to feed the fish.
yeah. Any other rules for best practice besides just listing the cards that are acceptable to play?
If we're talking about deafening silence and fish, I mean, I feel like we've had this discussion on the podcast before, but the like rule of law heuristic study discussion, which I feel is like an interesting one to have, right? Where, like the potential downside of playing heuristics or a rule of law into a heuristic study is that like it actually makes it more likely for people to skimp on paying for it, because it's like, well, it's only 1 card a turn, and they just like feed it 1 card every turn, which is like more than they'd be feeding it if they were just like playing 2 cards a turn and paying for both of them.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of that. Like, I think I see the same thing often with like Narset and heuristic study. It's like, well, I'll feed them the 1 card and then just play a bunch of spells. Whereas if there wasn't the Narset, they might have just they would have just played 1 spell and paid for it or whatever. I think obviously it's a little bit different with something like Narset, because like you do have the option to spend more mana. On other things. Yeah, there's definitely an element of like imposing what seems like a limit on how many cards they're going to draw kind of makes people sometimes just play to that limit, rather than like when it's unlimited, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to play around this. Then when it's limited, they go, well, I guess I'll give them that limit because, at least it's not unlimited.
Yeah, that the specific case with rule of law, I think, happens a lot. Like it happens a lot less with like very linear decks that aren't doing like interacting much, but I think it happens a lot more with decks that are like play counter magic and are looking to interact in other people's turns, because then they're just like, yeah, I'm gonna do this thing on my turn and I want to hold up mana so you can draw, and then I'm gonna counterspell this thing on your turn, and I want to keep holding up mana so you can draw again, and then when I use this like removal spell in your end step, I don't have any mana left to pay for it, so you can draw again on that end step.
Yeah, but I think maybe best practice play. It's acceptable to play the cards we just talked about. Don't play the cards we also talked about, and then and then talk. I think talking with an early Mystic Remora or Rhystic study to try and establish and get everyone on the same side and on the same page against the player is generally a good idea as well. Yeah.
Also, I would say like try not to be too on people, especially for like some of the more essential stuff, like,
oh, you developed
like I don't know,
how dare you.
Yeah, like someone plays, like they play nothing on turn 1 and then like a 2-mana rock on turn 2, and you're like, oh, feeding the fish. It's like, okay, let's have some sense of proportion around like, how valuable is this play to this person versus how many cards is this fish drawn. It's very easy to just get people, essentially just wanting to ignore you, or having a negative opinion of you when you're overzealous without good justification on trying to enforce people playing around it.
So our final category on this subject, it's kind of a mean category, is our fish, our heuristic study. So this is something that can happen in inbred metas where you know, if you're playing lots of grindy decks, you know how to counteract your opponents having fish. You can play more removal, but what's better than removing a fish? Taking a fish. So
play Steel Enchantment 5-head.
exactly
For the fish that already has 2 age counters on it.
I mean, if it's the mid to late game, yeah, I don't care. I'll gladly keep paying that. And along those lines, I've been messing around with Archmage's Charm in some of my mono blue decks to look at taking Mystic Remoras, Carpet of Flowers, Soul Rings, that sort of thing, and it's been with reasonable success. So.
Could you be a little bit more honest and say that you're looking at it to take Mystic Remoras, Soul Rings, and my Carpet of Flowers?
Yes, exactly. You can try and go to that level of counter picking your meta or teching your deck against the meta if you want, and sometimes it's correct. Yeah,
okay,
that wraps it up for our main topic. And
wait, before we move on, I have one more fish hypothetical.
Sure.
You're going second. The person going first plays land fish. Your hand is land, mana dork, lotus petal, fish. What do you do?
Land, dork, petal, fish, all of it.
I'm surprised. I thought I was going to be the only one with an answer.
No, for sure.
I'm far too greedy to not just.
What if
develop
the
all
people
myself.
after you are
same.
what if the people after you are very likely to be like playing dorks and not feeding the fish?
Yeah, sure. I'll play dork first. In that case. Wait, are they on Timna? Are they dork?
Do I have
Timna
my
decks?
second land drop in hand, Morgan?
Yeah.
Are they
Then
dork
I'm
Timna
more
decks?
then I'm
Or
more
are
inclined
they
to go.
Are they dork?
Sorry, I
decks
didn't mean like your hand is 4 cards, land, dork, petal, fish. I meant like those are the cards under consideration here. Your hand has, a piece of interaction, another land, and a tutor or whatever. Like, not you're in this desperate situation.
I'd probably still go back to the matchup dependency, but just on the surface,
So-
that kind of just based on the decks I play, that kind of seems great.
Yeah.
Are they? But yeah, are actually like a big thing for me is like, are they dork decks with like a 2 or 3 mana commander?
One of them is, one of them isn't.
Nice, split the difference. Yeah, I in that case, I mean, I probably just dork first and then fish on turn 2. Then
Greed Lord Reed over here with his.
no, because I mean, seriously, like if
No, I agree.
like
I agree. It can make sense, yeah.
if they're both Thras Timna decks, like
and you can start
like,
out the fish and then stick yours a turn later with more development.
you just
mana.
like
That
hold
seems
the
really
fish
good.
forever because like they're probably gonna go like dork Timna, and then like probably even like Thrasios on the turn after that or whatever. So you could just like hold a fish forever.
Okay, so that wraps it up for our main topic, and that means it's time for everyone's favorite segment, Gut Check.
Good check. Yeah.
Check.
Gotcha.
Wait, I thought for this one we were gonna synchronize it, but
Oh no.
Is that
we
our best
did
try?
we did get called out for a complete inability to synchronize our gut checks.
Okay, I feel like calling it an inability isn't fair because we never tried to synchronize.
So yes, but I'm also not
Conscious
disputing that we have an inability to
inability.
synchronize on it.
No, Morgan will
Mutual
just we'll just fix
realization.
that in post, dude. He's gonna line up all the
Yeah.
tracks so that we're all saying Gut Check at the same time, and it's gonna just.
Although I
This
will
whole
say you
conversation
guys,
has no context.
Matt already knows, but there actually was a non-zero amount of energy in the gut check on the last episode, on the 2-1 episode.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have had a chance to listen that far yet, but there was some energy put into me saying gut check.
Had
So
to make
so
up
take
for
that
the
server
sample,
first.
take that
Nice.
sample and just copy it into every episode.
So
Dude, I have a brand to uphold.
this week's Gut Check is one that isn't exactly gonna translate well for like a poll question. So sorry, Reed, about
God
that.
damn it!
Translate into a poll question.
I'm gonna air some dirty laundry here because of this. I've been on Linden for like like months at this point to like come up with better gut checks for like our Discord to vote on, so that I don't have
We're
to
on
do,
episode
like,
50, dude. We're out of all the good checks.
just terribly formatted like Discord polls for this stuff, and he just refuses to improve it at all. He's just like, no, I gotta do the
We've got all
most
the good
open-ended ones I
I
can
don't know,
possibly
Reed,
do and
man.
make it
You
a
gotta be
nightmare
the
for you to
one-
try to figure out.
You gotta be the one coming up with gut checks now if you've got such high demands.
Or maybe I just make Lyndon do the Discord posts every time I post it.
Okay, so this week's gut check is a bit of a weird one. So what decks that you guys are kind of known for playing, or you play a lot, do you know for sure you aren't going to be taking to Tier 1 Con, the main event, and why?
Oh
Thrasios
boy, that's
Bruce.
a long list.
Because it doesn't run black.
Definitely not Cole, not Varals. Unfortunately.
Definitely not for alls, Reed?
definitely not Varals. Definitely not
Okay.
Varals. And definitely not Cole.
Wow.
Let's see. I will not be bringing Hullen, Calamax, Kess, Muldrotha. What else do I play?
Vanifar.
Vanifar, Olivia / Chainer, Kikar.
Just on a side note there, it's kind of honestly so unfortunate how badly positioned Kess is now. I don't know.
I mean,
Feels bad.
honestly, it's like I feel like Kess is pretty underrated. Like, I'm still not even convinced it's not the best Grixis commander. But it's definitely like, I think that honestly, like, Grixis is just, as a Grixis commander, it's like very hard to justify over just going up a color either into like Thrasios Vial or Ikram or into like Timnachrom type stuff. Like I think both of those are sort of pretty obviously a lot better than what Kess offers, and like, well, something like a Nala or like or Rog Silas or Vile Smasher, Malcolm, I don't necessarily think are obviously better than Kess. They have like something unique about them that you lose when you go up colors like that. And so it's like much easier to justify playing them.
Matt, what about you?
Well, side point. Oh, sorry. I maybe you missed it. I immediately said I'm not bringing Thras Bruce because it doesn't play black.
Okay. So myself, I will not be bringing Gitrog, and I will not be bringing Baral or any of my other mono blue decks. I don't think. And the main reason is that, while it was fun to play those, I played the Gitrog in tournaments before. Played Baral in the Tier 1, I guess, qualifier, or what, I don't know what they were called, the webcam series stuff. And did decently well. The decks are not that good, and even though I'm comfortable with them, have lots of experience, I think I'd rather take my chances playing a better deck at an event with such high stakes.
Oh yeah, I'm not taking a Nala. I'm not taking Thrasios and Nadir. Like, I'm gonna be on something with 4 colors in it at least. I'm pretty confident about that.
One of my 3 top choices right now has 3 colors. The other are 4.
Yeah, so I mean, notably, Morgan didn't say the deck that he didn't. Well, among Morgan's many list of decks, he did not mention the deck that he had won initially with. So maybe keep an eye out. And now you guys know what to counterpick against us. So
I mean, that being said, he also
most
certainly didn't mention Tazri Zerda, so gotta keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, true.
No, that is true. You know what? I'll do it. I'm crazy.
Well, you'll actually purchase a Tazri to go play in Tier 1 Con with? Amazing.
What a hard sell. Okay, I might have to rethink this one.
Cool. So that does it for a gut check. And if you guys want to let us know, I guess you could just instead of answering a poll on our Discord, you could go to our Discord and you could just tell us what decks you are or aren't going to play. I mean, maybe don't just tell us every single deck you aren't going to play, but what you guys are thinking of taking to Tier 1 Con, or what decks you think would be worth taking. That'd be kind of interesting. Yeah.
Actually, no. You guys should vote on what decks we're not taking to Tier 1 Con. Not what decks you think we shouldn't take to Tier 1 Con, but which decks we actually are not taking to Tier 1 Con.
Who has the best not deck to take, or who's taking the... Oh, God. So, yeah, on to listener questions. On to listener questions. So, we have this question coming in to us from Big Cat. So, Big Cat asks, how do y'all feel about people abusing the priority system in CDH? Example. Player C asked if Player D and Player A had any responses to Player B's spell. When we said no, and that it resolved, he said, well, I haven't passed priority, I just asked if you had responses.
So, the ambiguous asking in a way that makes it seem as if you're passing priority and then, we're trying to walk that back, I feel like that's sort of scummy and, isn't something that should be encouraged at all. But I certainly think it's reasonable to, before you pass priority, to make it explicit that you're not passing priority, but ask the rest of the table.
Yeah,
well, I mean, I think that a lot of the time a lot of the time I also don't like that, unless you have, a very specific reason.
I think a legitimate reason could be that your type of interaction is narrow. I know this has happened before with Flusterstorms, where you're like, listen, I can interact, but my spell is only going to get better to interact with this thing as the turn progresses more. So those kind of instances make sense to me. But if it's I don't want to use my force of will, oh, come on.
Yeah, there certainly are instances of I can. I have a Flusterstorm that's not good right now, but might be very, very good later. Or something if we're truly desperate, I'll consult for interaction. But stuff where it's just basically hey, do you have something? And you're looking at a swan song in your hand. I don't know, that I feel like that's just trying to play on your opponent's unwillingness to lie, rather than just taking the risk of, I'm not going to spend my interaction, I'm going to be greedy. But definitely being ambiguous about the communication and trying to get your opponents to commit to something under false pretenses of where you are in the game. No, that's very much not cool in my book.
Agree. Anyone have anything else to say about this, or shall we move on to our second listener question?
And if you're unsure what they're doing, just ask if they pass priority. It's actually not even a bad response to.
Someone asked,
it's not a bad
do
response
you have anything?
to.
Are you passing priority?
Yeah. Do you have anything? Did you pass priority? Or just being you have priority until they say otherwise. Then.
Mm-hmm. So our next listener question comes to us from Bending Guy, and Bending Guy asks, "How do you feel about blocking lethal attacks with no way of surviving on your own? Is it a spite play?"
Okay, I feel like I have a very quick point, or just rule. If there's any reasonable chance that you could survive based on your opponents having open mana and that block, let's just say they would have a removal spell and that block would matter, then yes, absolutely block every single time, because you always played your outs. You don't it might seem ridiculous that one of your opponents might save you, but benefit of the doubt there. But there are definitely some cases that sorry, you go.
I would say that your blocks should try and maximize something that makes sense in the context of combat. So that might be I'm going to minimize incoming damage. That makes a certain amount of sense. Or I'm going to minimize the number of unblocked attackers, which makes it easier for someone to intervene and save you.
Yeah.
Or things like that.
Or I'm gonna block everything that's not the piece that somebody else might want gone. There's there's an eidolon of rhetoric swinging at me, plus a bunch of warriors or whatever, or dorks. I'm gonna block everything that's not the eidolon. If somebody wants to remove the eidolon, they can save me by doing so.
But if it is something that you want gone, then definitely still block it.
Yeah, I think that there's an element of like, for example, if someone swung for lethal at me, I had like a bunch of dorks, whatever, and they swung with like Wandering Archaic and a bunch of tutus. I think that like piling 4 things in front of the Wandering Archaic to kill it and leaving like 6 unblocked tutus when you're at 4 is like,
Yeah,
I'm not.
that's iffy.
I don't think that's like that. That feels to me like you're moving out of. I'm trying to make like a rational block for whatever chance I have of not dying, and into I'm trying to, exact some revenge or punishment for someone
So
killing
Now,
me.
if now that
think-
being said, if you can make like a deal with somebody at the table where it's like, I will block to kill this Wandering Archaic if you cast your Zealous Persecution to get rid of the tokens or whatever, then like sure. But yeah, it's about like actually reasonably playing to your outs and not playing for spite.
So I think there's also an aspect of. So I can see both your argument working, but I can also see like, what if right before they go to their declare attacks, you say, if you swing out with me for lethal, let's say they need to send the Wandering Archaic in, you say, I'm gonna block the Wandering Archaic. I'm gonna kill the Wandering Archaic if you swing out for lethal at me. Like, is that a spite play?
I mean,
Yes.
Is it
yeah.
a spite play if you say if you swing for lethal at me, I'm gonna destroy your Rhystic study?
I legitimately, it's a question that I don't have an answer to, because I think that with lethal attacks, it's you as the lethal attacker. I'm always considering that when I'm attacking, that I'm factoring in what I'm gonna lose. I'm assuming they're gonna block all my best stuff. And I'm gonna lose, like, if I have to kill someone by attacking in with an opposition agent, I'm assuming I'm gonna lose the opposition agent. I'm not assuming I'm just gonna get someone, like, take them down to 0 for free. So
yeah, I guess
with that logic, like, to me, from my perspective, saying that, like, taking out someone's Rhystic study as you're going out seems like a spite play. But if you say before they do that that's what you're gonna do, like, I don't know, like, because to me it doesn't seem a spite play with the lethal attacker scenario, but it more seems that with the Rhystic study scenario, although they seem very equivalent. So that's what it's causing me a lot of internal conflict.
Yeah,
I guess, like, sorry, go ahead, man.
if it's 2 equal lethal attackers and you choose between a Wandering Archaic and a vanilla token with the same power toughness, for instance, then I think it makes sense to be playing to your outs and blocking the Wandering Archaic, because it is generically going to be a nuisance for practically every single deck. And if you do have another turn, you're definitely going to not want there to be a Wandering Archaic there. But I think I think before blocks, kind of making a statement like that is a bit. It's not spite, but it's definitely not.
You're trying to
you're
trying to play to win, because you're trying to make it costly for your opponent to take you out of the game, which to
But,
me
like,
does not seem like out of spite.
But once they've committed, then, like, once they've committed and you're dead, making it costly for them to take you out of the game is.
But yeah, I mean, I think this is where I would draw the line, which is, it seems like a very weird place to draw the line. But if I say I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. If I haven't said anything about it, it seems like a spite play, which seems very weird and arbitrary, but
Yeah,
that's kind of where I
wouldn't-
fall on it. I don't know.
I wouldn't necessarily think someone was spiting me if they didn't explicitly say that they were going to block my best stuff, given equal blockers.
No, given equal blocker, but what if it was the scenario Morgan said with the
The 2
two twos?
tokens.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you're not playing to your outs. Like, what's more likely in that scenario? It's
Well,
definitely that
I think
they
a
don't
more
have,
likely
like,
scenario would be that my opponent would not want to attack me to lose their Wandering Archaic, than that some random opponent would save me. Unless I make a deal for that.
But, like, that's not how the game works, right? Like, they either attack you or you don't, and then you have to make your block decision after. You can say what you're gonna do all you want.
Yeah, but I think sticking to one's word and what you say you're gonna do is an important aspect of
right.
the game.
My argument would be that you shouldn't say that.
Yeah, I don't. I think. Yeah, I don't
Isn't
follow this.
the-
I don't agree with that. I don't think.
Isn't the assumption that the opponent makes a correct assessment and expects you to block their Wandering Archaic? Because
Yeah, I think
that's playing to their
yeah.
outs. So going ahead and saying it is, in that sense, like, not really the game, right? And the way that Morgan
Well,
said it.
I guess it depends on if blocking the Wandering Archaic is quote unquote an out. Like, you could also argue that in that case with something like Wandering Archaic, not blocking it gives your opponents like more of an incentive to save you by removing it than like a vanilla 4/4. I agree that like to an extent when you engage in combat with creatures, you're exposing them to risk, which isn't true in the like Rhystic study disenchant scenario. Like attacking someone isn't putting like you're not saying I'm exposing this Rhystic study to extra risk by attacking, from a flash blocker or like a removal spell to save yourself. So I get that there is a difference. I guess I'm like kind of in the same boat as you, Lyndon, where like I think you should be able to block and kill stuff, but I'm not exactly sure how to draw the line about what blocks are acceptable versus like the Rhystic study thing, which to me is clearly unacceptable.
I think in that Wandering Archaic case, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that the only way you can get rid of it in this scenario is by blocking it. Where with like the Nature's Claim Rhystic study scenario, you can wait until later, most likely. That can't possibly be the only moment to deal with it.
Yeah, I think Morgan. We're in similar
exposing
boats.
it to risk.
I think we're in similar boats, but it seems that we're kind of going in opposite directions. Where I think for you the Rhystic study scenario is informing your kind of thoughts on blocking, whereas for me it's almost like my thoughts on blocking might be informing my kind of take on the Rhystic study scenario, where it's like I might now be questioning whether or not it is spite play to kind of announce that if you attack me, I'm going to blow up your Rhystic study, which still feels very spiteful to me, but now I'm starting to question it more because of how I feel about lethal blocks.
Maybe I'm just based on, I don't know, I guess the way that we play and where we openly discuss threat assessment as a table. Maybe that's polluting my mind a bit, where if my expectation is that everyone's trying to make the most properly assessed move, and I don't feel the obligation to go ahead and say what I'll do when that's the expectation that you understand that already.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the expectation is already that if the person is making that attack, they're already expecting to lose their Archaic, and they've evaluated that. I feel like that's how it is most of the time in the games that I play.
Yeah. So it doesn't. So yeah, you shouldn't feel like that's a spite play then if you don't announce it ahead of time, based on that logic, right?
Yeah.
But should they be expecting to lose their Archaic if, I mean, it just seems a little bit weird to me that for example, if they had 2 more health, or if you had 2 more health, assume the scenario is constructed in such a way that if you had 2 more health, you could actually survive by chumping the Archaic and blocking other stuff. It seems weird to me, I guess essentially the idea that it's oh well, I'm actually dead as opposed to nearly dead means I get to, kill more of your stuff. I can't not see that as at least partially spiteful.
I guess you can also make your political calls to savior before the blockers are declared anyway, right? You can project ahead and say, hey, actually, if I did this type of block, would anyone have an answer? And I think, at that point, there's pretty much no reason why another player might withhold that information until after blocks are declared, right? Because they kind of want to use their removal favorably.
Yep,
so it could be spite then.
Block to kill the Archaic, and then you can pyroblast their Crom, and then I don't die, and the Archaic's gone, and everyone wins.
I don't know. I think personally, my kind of concept of spite play has been challenged a lot recently, and I've kind of been, unsure on where I fall on things now. And I think one of the things that I kind of just feel more or less to be true is that if you're making a play because you think it increases, if you're playing to win, to me it boils down to a lot of what the person is thinking internally, which is something I think it's just hard to objectively put objective criteria to what is a spite play. That's kind of
definitely
the case where I've been.
Okay, Lyndon, could you knock it off, because this introspective and nuanced content is not what our listeners are here for. So.
They're here to listen to 4 people just talk over each other for an hour and a half.
Exactly.
There's nothing in
They
the
want
rules
us
about no spy
angry and
plays.
opinionated. And
Comprehensive spites.
We just need to
Reed,
recreate.
and
the,
you're a bit quiet. Do you want to chime in on anything? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think my opinion on it is very anti-philosophical, unfortunately enough, which is really my opinion on it in an abstract sense, like most things on the borderline with CDH, is quite honestly, if you're in that position and you have consistent reasoning and logic for the play that you made, and you truly believe that it was in your best interest, I think that's enough for me. Other people can disagree with that, and I mean,
No,
you'll
I
obviously have
agree with you, Reed.
disagreements.
Yeah.
But it's just like if you have internal consistency and you truly believe that it was the best play at the time or the play that had the highest DP for you, then you make the play and you just accept anything that comes with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think I agree a lot with Reed on this. Yeah. Cool. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. If you guys like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, by our email intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work towards improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we are at patreon.com/intonorthpodcast. Another way you can support us is via our TCG Player affiliate link. So anytime you want to purchase something from TCG Player, if you use our affiliate link, which is in the podcast/YouTube description, a portion of your purchase goes towards supporting the podcast, and we appreciate it greatly. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, to Nate Slubber for our equally lovely podcast logo, and to our video editor Manta Ray Hat. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Till then,